Alright, full disclaimer, two things. First off, I was once again an idiot and forgot to save after the last episode, so I had to redo it. So if you see any inconsistencies, that's why. Second, for some reason my microphone didn't want to work right the first few times I tried to record this episode, so I had to do a whole bunch of re-recordings and test recordings until my commentary eventually devolved into this. Meow! Meow, meow, meow! Meow! But anyway, that's about it. Enjoy the finished version of this episode. At the end of the last episode, we received the TM for a move called 100,000 Volt, which is the technique known as Thunderbolt in the English version. And its Japanese name tends to confuse people who don't understand Japanese. Because it's 100,000 Volt, but when it's written out in Japanese, it looks like it says 10 something. But that's because Japanese literally has a word for 10,000. So 100,000 is 10,000. So yeah, Thunderbolt in Japanese is 100,000 volts, and if you watch the anime, they sometimes play around with that, where like, they'll have a joke where Satoshi tells Pikachu to do a 100,000 volt attack, but he's like, actually no, make that 10 volt. And in the X, Y, and Z opening, there's the lyrics where it's a million volt. And then those kinds of lines don't really make sense if you're watching, well, even the subs, depending on what fansub group, some of them use the original names translated and some of them use the localized ones. And I think for that first example I just mentioned, they put up a translator's note instead of just, you know, using the original names all the time, so you wouldn't need translator's notes for that kind of thing, but whatever. And then there's the first episode of the Battle Frontier arc, which has a particularly bad fansub, where they wrote it as 100,000 Bolt, giving us some twisted hybrid between the Japanese and English names. That entire episode is just full of what the fuck was this translator thinking. This is the same group that I mentioned in the first episode with that really long translation for the Pokemon bestiary. May have been a different translator though. They've released a bunch of different, seemingly random episodes and the quality varies greatly. Alright, so a glitch in the first generation, if you save while standing at the spot where a tree was, then reset the game, you'll be standing on top of the tree. Now don't worry, you're not stuck, you can walk off of it, easy as that. So you know how in the last episode I talked about me as a kid being a stupid idiot and not knowing you needed flash to light up the rock tunnel? And I said there were probably a bunch of hints that I missed. Well, turns out I was right, because this girl, when I defeat her after the battle, she tells me that you need light in order to light up the next tunnel ahead. So yeah, it was just a matter of me just not talking to NPCs, and I guess it's understandable because I was like, I think I played this game at a younger age than the target demographic. I think I was like 4 when I first started this, and I couldn't really read that well. But back to 100,000 volts, its Japanese name is actually referenced in Raichu's Pokédex entries, which state its electric attacks can reach up to 100,000 volts of electricity. Also, another thing about 100,000 volts is that its battle animation contains more flashes in Japanese red and green compared to later versions of Generation 1, because of what I like to call PPP, or post-Porygon paranoia. There are also 2 other techniques that had their animations changed this way, namely Body Slam and Hyper Beam. But that wasn't enough because the Virtual Console version changed even more attack animations like that, including the aforementioned 3, which were edited even more than they already were. So because I've done about 1 million test recordings of this, I know that this item will not fit in my bag, so I have to backtrack back to the Pokemon Center and deposit some stuff in the PC. And yeah, I know that I could have done that before coming here, but I wanted to capture basically my experience the first time I tried recording this. So anyway, a new development on something that I talked about a while ago. Uri Geller has finally retracted his lawsuit against Nintendo. Now, as much as I'm glad that we're gonna start seeing Geller again in the card game and the anime, I do have to question the sincerity of his apology, because it seems like he's not actually sorry for anything, and he's just doing this for free publicity. Because let's be honest here, who gives a shit about Uri Geller anymore? And it becomes obvious because Well, in his apology tweet, he plugged his website, and it gets worse because Dr. Lava tried to contact him and asked him if he would sign 100 Kadabra cards for charity, and he declined. Those are not the actions of someone who's sincerely sorry. Those are the actions of someone who wants to be relevant again now that James Randi is dead. Although, to be honest, I don't really see the appeal of wanting to own a Kadabra card signed by Uri Geller in the first place. It seems like a devaluation. It's like getting a copy of Grand Theft Auto signed by Jack Thompson, you know? No thank you. And there was some controversy surrounding the whole charity thing too, because, well, some people were saying, well, it's good that he didn't accept the offer because there was a rumor going around. I don't know what started it, but for some reason people thought that the charity in question was going to be Autism Speaks. And if you don't know who they are, the only thing you really need to know is that they're tied with PETA for worst charity organization out there. And that is with charity in big fucking air quotes. Take that from someone who actually is on the spectrum, unlike the people running that organization. But yeah, then Dr. Lava stepped in and clarified that he never said anything about any specific charity organization, and he didn't even know what Autism Speaks was. So yeah, I don't know where people got that idea in the first place, but it doesn't matter anyway. So in the last episode I was talking about Mattis and the Japanese stereotype of Americans being army veterans. And, you know, this was before Pokemon even got translated into English. So at this point, this was purely for a Japanese audience. But you know how I keep talking about how Pokemon got more and more westernized and Americanized over the years? Well, in Generation 5, they thought, well, you know what? Let's make a game aimed specifically at our American audience. Let's have the entire game, the entire region based off of a part of the United States. And why don't we go the extra mile, you know? Why not make a Pokemon that's an eagle and the colors of the American flag, and it's gonna be some awesome representation for our American fans? What should we call him? And then somebody is like, I have an idea. Let's call him Wargle. So, you know, it's one thing to have a negative stereotype of a nationality in a game that's not yet intended for that nationality. It's another thing to have said stereotype in a game that's specifically made to appeal to that demographic. But I don't know, they might have been like, oh well, it doesn't matter, we're gonna change the name to Braviary for the American release anyway, and not see the irony of trying to globalize your franchise by having it take place in other countries, yet still changing the names for said countries. And yeah, I know I've been complaining about that a lot, but like, it's not even like you can say I'm beating a dead horse, because that horse is not dead. They're still doing this shit in the new generations. And I want to make one thing clear about what I'm saying about stuff like Wargle and, you know, Mattis. This isn't me trying to go all woke about it. Like, I'm not like, oh, this is problematic and you need to be offended by this. Especially because I'm not even American, so that's the worst kind of woke bullshit, is when people who aren't part of a group of people try to, like, dictate what that group of people should be offended by. So, like, I'm not saying this for, like, oh, this is politically incorrect or kind of that kind of shit, but, like, I'm just pointing this out, especially since, like, with Wargle, it seems so backhanded, like they're keeping the quote-unquote offensive name to themselves. Because they're like, huh, Americans like war, right? And then they just changed it for the American release, so they'd never know. You know, imagine if an American franchise did this in Japan. Like, let's say, I don't know, like My Little Pony. There's a new generation coming out, Generation 5 in fact, so even the numbers work out for this analogy. But imagine if Hasbro was like, you know, Generation 4 was kind of a flop in Japan. They only dubbed the first 3 seasons and they took ages between seasons 2 and 3. So, yeah, let's go all out for the Japanese audience this time. Let's go and have a pony that's a white coat with a red mane and tail, a rising sun cutie mark, and let's call it, I don't know, Hiroshima Bomb. And then in Japan they change it to like Cherry Blossom or something. Sounds kind of tone deaf, doesn't it? So for something different entirely, I want to talk about the way color works in the Generation 1 Pokemon games. Because, of course, they were originally created for the original Game Boy, which didn't have any color at all. But you're seeing me play this game right now, and there's color. Like, Hoodin is yellow, the different Pokemon have different sprite colors associated to them. When you go to the overworld, it's green on the routes, and in the different towns and cities, it changes depending on, you know, the color that the town is named after. Stuff like that. So there are basically two different ways to play original Game Boy games in color. There was the Game Boy Color, and by extension the Game Boy Advance, but then there was also the Super Game Boy, which was an attachment for the Super Famicom and Super Nintendo to play Game Boy games on. But the Super Game Boy came out before the Game Boy Color, and both of these have different color palettes. So if a game is color compatible with the Game Boy Color, that doesn't necessarily mean it has color on the Super Game Boy, and vice versa. So the first generation of Pokémon had a Super Game Boy Color palette, but not one for the Game Boy Color, because it wasn't out yet when they came out in Japan. So what you're seeing right now is what the game looks like when played on a Super Game Boy. If you played it on a Game Boy Color or Advance, there wouldn't be any real color. It would just do that thing that you got on Game Boy Color when you tried to play original Game Boy games, where on the starting screen you could like press the D-pad in different directions and you would get different color palettes, but it would all just still be the same grayscale, but it would like retroactively add color to it, but it would just still be the same grayscales, just the different scales of gray would be replaced by different colors. But what the Pokemon games did do, however, is that each game had a default color scheme. So if you're playing green on a Game Boy Color or Advance, you would get a palette that's mostly green with some red aspects. In red, it would be the same colors but reversed. In blue, you would get a blue and red color scheme, and in yellow, you would get yellow and red. Now you may be thinking, wait, but yellow did have a proper Game Boy Color palette, didn't it? Not in Japan. That was only added for the international release. I think that's the only game on the entire Game Boy library that got color support added in a localization. But yeah, yellow got a different palette in the West, which was pretty much the same as the Super Game Boy palette, but just way more saturated. I guess they made it more saturated so that it would be easier to see on a non-backlit Game Boy Color screen. And speaking of the Super Game Boy, the Pokemon games also got their own unique Super Game Boy borders. This is the one for Japanese Red, Japanese Green, and Japanese Blue. The English versions are the same, except that the words Pocket Monsters are removed. They could have at least changed it to Pokemon, but no, they decided to get rid of it entirely. Then there's Yellow. This is the Japanese version, and here's the English one. This time it already said Pokemon and not Pocket Monsters in the Japanese version. So the only thing they changed about the word Pokemon is that they changed the E to look like this, the lowercase e with the accent on it. And they also changed the word Pikachu to Yellow. This is, I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but the official title of Yellow in Japan is not Yellow or Kiro or anything. It's literally just Pocket Monsters Pikachu. Although technically the official English name isn't Pokemon Yellow either. It's Pokemon Yellow version Special Pikachu Edition. And Knuckles. Featuring Dante from the Devil May Cry series. Okay, I'll stop. Hey, at least it's not as bad as what they did with the German version of Heart Gold and Soul Silver, and I think some other European versions as well. Everyone assumed before they dropped the official titles that they would just translate Heart Gold and Soul Silver into German like they did with every other generation before. But no, what they did was they left Heart Gold and Soul Silver in English, but the official German titles translated back into English are Pokemon Gold version Heart Gold and Pokemon Silver version Soul Silver. Wow, that's a mouthful. Did they expect anyone to actually use the full titles for these games? Because no one does. But back to the Super Game Boy. Gold and Silver were like the reverse of Generation 1, where they had full color on the Game Boy Color, but not on the Super Game Boy. And the Super Game Boy Color, the Super Game Boy borders for Gold and Silver look like this for Gold, and this for Silver. And this time, they actually did just change Pocket Monsters to Pokemon instead of getting rid of it entirely in the English version. Also, Crystal Well, Crystal was a Game Boy Color exclusive game. You couldn't play it on a regular Game Boy or a Super Game Boy. But it still has the gold border on the cartridge. So if you try to play Crystal on a Super Game Boy, it shows the gold border. And what's especially interesting is it's the Japanese gold border, even in the international version. So yeah, the only time the term Pocket Monsters is ever used in an official English game, it's because of an oversight. Great. There are also a bunch of spin-off games that have their own Super Game Boy borders. The one for Pokemon Card GB, aka Pokemon Trading Card Game, had the text Pocket Monsters Trading Card Game removed. And there's also an unused one that's still in the game files that looks like this. And then there's this one that's also not used. That seems to be some kind of testing thing. Then there's Card GB 2, which doesn't have an official Super Game Boy border at all, but both of the unused ones from the predecessor are still in that one. There's also Pokemon Pinball, where the US version added a trademark symbol, and the European version changed the logo entirely. Also, while I was talking about colors and the Japanese versus the international version, I might as well bring up the cartridges themselves, because everyone in the West is familiar with the cartridges being color-coded, like red version has a red cartridge, blue has a blue cartridge, and yellow has a yellow cartridge. That was not a thing in Japan. The Japanese Generation 1 cartridges were just the default gray ones, like every other Game Boy game. Only in Generation 2 did they start using special cartridges for the Pokemon games. And even there, gold and silver, the cartridges weren't actually gold and silver. The Japanese silver cartridge was a dark gray on the front and a dark blue on the back, and Japanese gold is the same colors but vice versa. So up until this point, it seemed like Japan always got the boring cartridges and we got the cool ones. But then came Crystal, and that's where we got robbed. Because on first glance, when you look at the cartridge from the front, aside from the label, they look the same. But then you flip them over to the back. The Japanese cartridge has this cool looking Suicune logo on the back that we didn't get, probably for cost cutting reasons. And then for Generation 3, the cartridges pretty much look the same aside from the label. But that was also the last generation where they did the color-coded cartridges thing at all before they dropped it entirely in Generation 4. So I'm gonna end off this episode here, but not before saving. See, I saved this time, I did it on camera, and also in case you didn't know that there was like a super potion hidden behind that bush, there it is.